Dr. Chloe believes that free speech isn't just a political issue, it's a mental health issue. And her book shows how using your voice isn't just empowering, it can actually be really cathartic. It can be really healing. It can be really affirming. As you address in your book, Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly, it really is a decision point. People actually have to decide, am I going to give my power away to other people and let them decide whether or not I claim my space and speak up, or am I going to let them intimidate me and put me to the side? What caused you to write this book? Why this book? Why now?
What happened is I was living in New York City. As we all know, it's not easy to make it there. But I was doing it. So I had, gone through Columbia University where I had done a lot of what we call self-censoring in order to get through and get the grades I needed in order to get into the clinical psych program I wanted, which, I did a lot of self-censoring there as well. And as I was trying to build my business, I was very thankful. I was getting a lot of media attention, which was great for the business. But I just always knew that there were certain things I couldn't say. I never said anything that was untrue, but I just avoided certain topics that I knew wouldn't work for the media. And that worked fine until COVID, when, the law then was that I was going to have to mask my then 3-year-old son. And that was really the red line for me. I just couldn't do it. And so my family and I actually fled to Florida. And in that process, since that was such a big deal to me, I wrote down all the reasons why I felt like it was harmful to mask children for such long periods of time. And it was organizing to me to even just write it all down. And I shared it with some colleagues to say, hey, am I missing something? Because I'm thinking of publishing this, but is there something embarrassingly wrong here? And because nobody else is talking about it that I could see. And my colleagues said, no, Chloe, there's nothing wrong here factually, but you should not publish it because it could discourage people from masking their children, which obviously I was like, okay, well, this makes no sense. So I published it. And then Dr. Jay Bhattacharya picked it up. Other people, Clay Travis picked it up. I was living in Florida. I was having open dialogue and sharing what I really thought about something. And I started realizing that my own cognitive process was improving, my emotional presence, my social relationships. I was really being authentic. And that's what touched off my interest in the mental health benefits of free speech.
It's interesting that you noticed it in yourself first, because we might notice headwinds because we really feel that if we're pushing against this zeitgeist to go along with the mob, to not push back, and we feel that pressure. But then when we get out of that and we actually get tailwinds, we get a wind at our back and it starts to get easier. Sometimes we don't notice that right away. But when you pick up and move your whole family, that's a life decision. That had to be a big deal when you leave New York and you leave your lifestyle to go somewhere else. This had to be something where you thought, this is a life decision for my 3-year-old. You had to feel strongly that doing what they were telling you to do was going to have a truly adverse effect on that child.
Absolutely, Dr. Phil. So yeah, to me, I felt like, it felt like child abuse. I had a gut reaction to that and I just couldn't do it. And that's why I felt the need to write it all down, to really explore, the self-esteem issues I felt it could put on children, the communication issues, all those issues. But you're right, that was the red line for me. But honestly, in retrospect, I feel like it was a silver lining, because I was almost like a frog, that's getting cooked in like warmer and warmer water. And I just had been self-censoring and kind of going along. because I wasn't aware of how it was affecting me. It was almost like slowly, bit by bit, going into the witness protection program or something where you're not really being yourself. And then that last thing where it came to not myself, but my child, I said, no, 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 I cannot do that. And then it was truly a wake-up call once I started just connecting with my own thoughts again. That's one of the things I talk about in the book, is that we start with suppression, where we're consciously stopping ourselves. I know you know all this. And then we go to repression, where we're just doing it kind of automatically, and then we're going into denial. And as you said, we can self-censor because we think it's just going to make things easier. Oh, it's not hurting anything. I'll just keep some of my thoughts to myself. And a little self-restraint is actually a good thing. But I just had never stopped to think about it, about what that's actually really doing on a mental health level, as well as like a cognitive awareness level. And, we all know we're in an epidemic of loneliness. And so how that's degrading social support when, we're not being real with other people, or they're not being real with us. And to a certain degree, we stop being real with ourselves after a certain point.
Did you look at some of these people that were devoid of critical thinking and say to yourself, what is wrong with these people? How can they ignore science, empirical data, and blindly adhere to some of this thinking without challenge, without debate, without what did you say to yourself about that, knowing how you feel about the importance of the ability to ask questions and express views?
When I was at Columbia as, an older student, I had an extremely deferential attitude towards the professors, and I really regarded it as kind of a hallowed ground. And I felt like, if there's something I don't understand or that doesn't make sense to me, it's my job to try to learn and understand it. And I took that attitude through much of Columbia. And then when I got to my clinical psych PhD program, I did have a little bit more just confidence in my own opinions. And I had enough knowledge that I started to feel like I could truly activate my critical thinking skills. And I definitely had one of those wake up call moments. So I was actually working in a lab that was somewhat focused on CRT, on critical race theory. And I remember, I worked in a variety of labs. So, there were various situations, but there was one situation in particular where we were looking at some data. And this was, during the Obama presidency. And we weren't seeing some of the, quote, typical effects that that CRT researchers might have been wanting. And I remember saying, I wonder if we're not seeing this because, with the Obama presidency and whatnot, maybe some of the effects that started this critical race theory, maybe they're changing, and maybe that would be good news. And one of the researchers in charge said to me, Chloe, that's not the effect we're going for here. And that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, this is how the sausage gets made. And there were various other moments where I remember I asked a question at one point, and somebody said to me, careful, Chloe. And I said, careful of what? What do you mean? And, it was just one of those times where it was really during the PhD program, Dr. Phil, to answer your question, where I started to really realize I kind of had to sing a certain song if I wanted to get through. And my heart really goes out to younger students because, like I said, I was old enough that I had enough life experiences and my brain was more formed. But I have such applause and respect for younger students that are navigating these universities and managing to really still hang on to their true critical thinking abilities.
Homeowners, when's the last time you checked on your home title? If your answer is never, then this is for you. Scammers are stealing titles and your equity is the target. Criminals forge your signature, and just like that, your home title can be transferred out of your name. That's why I partnered with Home Title Lock, So you can find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code Phil at HomeTitleLock.com and you'll get a free title history report. Plus, you'll get a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud does happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Phil. When they shut the schools down and started masking kids and shutting the school down, I came out and said, let me tell you people something. Shutting these schools down when we have the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness among young people since we started keeping records, yanking the support system out from under these kids at this critical time is going to create more damage than this virus ever could. I promise you this is a bad mistake, and you don't have a plan for getting these schools back open and getting these children back into this support system. And by the way, when you do this, all these mandated reporters, all these people that are keeping their eyes on kids looking to be sure they're spotting if they're being abused, sexually molested, whatever, by their caregivers, all those mandated reporter eyes are not going to be on these kids. What you're doing is abandoning them to their abusers and locking them up behind closed doors where frustration effects are going to go high. And sure enough, reports dropped as much as 50% in some areas. Did abuse go down 50%? Of course not. Just reports went down 50%. And I said, you're going to create more problems with this long shutdown than the virus ever would. And you can't believe the level of attack that I got. Oh my God, you're an absolute quack. This is heresy. How can you say this? The hate mail, the condemnation. And I just doubled down and said, you're absolutely wrong. You're absolutely wrong. And when you talk to the pediatric epidemiologists, they tell you today that it has cost double-digit millions years of life lost for those kids because of the gap in achievement academically, the poorer jobs they will get, meaning they're higher risk jobs, the poorer insurance they'll have, the slower disease recognition, slower intervention. I mean, it'll shave years off the end of their lives. And with 50 million kids in public schools, just multiply it out. We've taken this generation and crippled them, and there's no plan to close the gap even today.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Dr. Phil, and I can really relate again to the sense that you mentioned of being attacked and that it was scary to speak up. If it wasn't for the fact, that we were literally talking about little children, I don't think I could have done it either. So, I mean, again, to this issue of bias and to just the numbers, whether it be, say, in education and the faculty, as well as in journalism. My previous book, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, is about the healthy function of anxiety. And that book did really well. It's, translated into 5 languages. But when I wanted to do this book, my very prestigious agent dropped me. My big publisher said, Chloe, we'd love to do another book with you, but just not this one. And, I'm so thankful to Skyhorse Publishing because, they did indeed take it on. But it was amazing to see how the machine, could just kind of turn against you. And to your point as well about you had the courage to speak up and tell them, hey, you're wrong. And that was where I found my courage too. But one of the chapters in the book, Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly, is called Common Objections to Free Speech. And one of them is, what about misinformation? And it gets to that, COVID point. And it's so interesting because the things that we were stifled and censored from saying, many of them turned out to be exactly true, exactly correct. And even if they hadn't, the point is that we develop good ideas, discard bad ideas, expose falsehoods through speech, through open dialogue. I share in the book, for example, Galileo was jailed for saying that the earth orbits the sun. And, there was a time when all the experts testified to Congress that, cigarettes were just fine for you. There was a time when our own profession was doing lobotomies, right? So experts are wrong all the time. And people have to be able to have open conversations and to discuss and debate.
You advocate for open, respectful debate, even about controversial topics, without fear of being silenced. When we talk about debate at college levels, when I went to school, long time before you went to school, we welcomed the other side of an issue. And you'd go and listen and you'd hear their thinking so you'd know how to defeat them. You'd find out, here's their thinking. Now I can go back and study up on how to shoot holes in this. But now it's the heckler's veto. They shout them down. They don't let them come. And that to me is insane. But that's what cancel culture is doing. And you talk about how we've got to have that back in our society. And that is important.
Definitely. Yeah. So, I have techniques in the book for speaking up as well as for listening respectfully, because both are important. I actually call it listening resiliently, again, because so many people are genuinely afraid to, quote, be triggered, or, they feel like they can't hear the wrong thing. And, Dr. Phil, you and I, of course, know as clinical psychologists, my legal mandate, and I imagine yours is too, is if a patient tells me that he's going to go shoot somebody, it is my legal duty to go and inform the police. If a patient tells me that he's going to go say something nasty to his neighbor, it is illegal for me to violate his confidentiality. And of course, the primary difference is that, that words are not actual violence. And so that attitude is permeating our campuses. There's this power structure where the faculty are all kind of thinking the same way. They have all this extra power, and they're more likely to display those social ostracization behaviors. It can be really a toxic environment on the campus, as well as an intellectually deprived environment on the campus.
And that's terrible for people to have to live with and experience that.
I participated in a documentary for PragerU a couple years ago about, the myth of toxic masculinity. And of course, the APA was really championing, in my view, a real smear on, just masculinity in general. And I've seen whatever emails I do see from them are talking about how to, quote, fight back, against the current administration and how to champion DEI. They don't seem to understand that it's gone the wrong way. And again, I look at groupthink with that. So one of the Irving Yannis, who's the psychologist that coined the term groupthink, he had 8 primary factors, and one of them is actually self-censorship that leads to this groupthink. Another one of them is a belief in the moral superiority of the group. And another one is the presence of self-appointed mind guards. So and the others as well, they just, when you read them, you're like, oh, wow, this is exactly what we're seeing right now, in my opinion.
In America, they're still caving to the pressure from the fringe groups because we don't have critical thinking. We don't have universities that are teaching people to speak back, and that's what you're talking about. And we're so influenced now by social media, and you really highlight how these algorithms reward both outrage and suppression instead of mental health and inquiry. How did we get so far down that wrong road?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Phil. And I love that chapter in your book too about the algorithms. And, again, going back to that groupthink, the idea that when you have this illusion of unanimity, and what you mentioned as well in your book about the spiral of silence that another researcher had discussed, which is that whether it be through social media, and thank goodness, right, that Elon Musk has bought Twitter and that we can have free speech on there. But it used to be that you would go on Twitter and you would think, hey, I'm really the only person who thinks that saying a man can't become a woman, doesn't make any sense. And Dr. Phil, you and I both compared all that to the emperor's new clothes, right? But
Yeah.
but the more that people don't see anybody else questioning it, like I said, when I wrote my own blog about the harms of masking children, I second guessed myself. I had to show it to colleagues to say, gosh, am I missing something? Am I going to make a fool of myself? Am I missing something obvious here? Because when nobody else is talking about it, or as you said, when the algorithm is just only feeding you one side and reinforcing only one side, you can come to think that there's a social consensus. That's actually another one of Irving Yannis's groupthink factors, is a false sense of social consensus, which of course is fed, by that illusion of unanimity, as well as the belief in the moral superiority of the group. So, labeling people as, well, you're transphobic, or you're Islamophobic if you want to, discuss or inquire about anything going on that has to do with anything related to any of those identities. And I would just say as well, unfortunately, Dr. Phil, you mentioned, well, why are these organizations like the American Association of Pediatrics, quote, caving to these things? I don't know if they're caving as much as they're leading the charge. And in some cases, you mentioned marketing, maybe even just really enjoying to cash the checks. Because Abigail Shrier, she wrote a wonderful book about some of the social contagion aspects of trans. And then she wrote another amazing book called Bad Therapy, about our own profession and some of the problems. So I probably foolishly tried again. I've largely stepped away from the listservs of our own profession because it's such an echo chamber, and I just feel like it always goes sideways. But I waded in and I shared Abigail Shrier's book, Bad Therapy, on a listserv for psychologists. And I said, hey, I'm really enjoying this book. I'm curious if anybody else has read this. Within minutes, multiple people wrote in and they said, I would never read anything by her. She's completely transphobic, blah, 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 blah. And these are intelligent people. But it's like I blame it on the groupthink, Dr. Phil. I don't know. I don't know what else to say.
And then just even reading it, they start putting you in a category in a list, and there are things you may not even know that impact you because you may be frozen out of certain things, excluded from certain things because they're saying, oh, she reads these books and all of that sort of thing. And it really worries me, particularly as you say, you were more mature when you were going through that educational process. But as you point out, think about the young people whose brains aren't completely formed. They don't know who they are yet. They're very impressionable, and they're a captive audience for these authority figures who are telling them, and they may be in a class in art history, but yet somebody is pushing an ideology on them that has nothing to do with the course description, but they're pushing their own agenda on them. And that worries me a lot.
I completely agree with that. And, that's why, again, I offer techniques in the book.
What do you say to people that speak up and do get pushback from people? Maybe they speak up in a neighborhood barbecue, they speak up in their Sunday school class, they speak up at work at maybe a lunch break, and they really are a lone voice, and people label them and say, oh, you're a Trumper, or what are you, some kind of conservative right winger? They start pushing back at them. What do you tell people if they find themselves in that situation? You address it in the book. Just what are some highlights?
First of all, I can understand that we probably all become so sensitized to some of that it can feel alarming almost at first, where we're cancel culture and all that stuff. But one of the things that I also encourage people to try to do if they get pushback is actually to welcome it. Because again, that's part of the true diversity of opinions and of thoughts. And so sometimes even just, reflecting back to the person, like, okay, so I hear what you're saying is that you think it's transphobic that I don't want a boy to play on our girls' soccer team league. Like, that's how you feel. That's what you're saying. And just invite the person to tell you more. Sometimes that can actually be disarming. I know, Dr. Phil, one of the things that you say, and I completely agree, is that people want to feel heard. And so sometimes just letting people know that, modeling for them that you can actually handle disagreement, and you'll even invite them to share. And then once they've shared, you can say, well, would you like to hear how I feel or why I view it differently? And if they'll actually own that they don't want to, if they'll say, no, I don't want to, then you can say, okay, I hear that. And then you don't have to, cast your pearls before swine. But if that can sometimes actually stimulate an open dialogue.
I think if you're patient and you do model what you want to get back, sometimes we do get what we put out.
Yeah.
And if you don't, bow your neck and become combative, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can take the air out of the room and calm things down some.